Welcome to She Defined, the podcast for smart, savvy women who are in search of more. I'm your host, Sharon Green. Today, I'm joined by Emma Lennon, She Define's feature writer. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we're going to talk about beauty ideals and the notion that there are specific beauty standards that are ingrained in women throughout their lives, especially from a young age, to boost their physical attractiveness. We also want to challenge some ideas and conventions about beauty and offer some different perspectives on how women can fight against unrealistic beauty standards. Big topic, I know, but I think it's an important one to discuss. So let's start this conversation by highlighting how unrealistic beauty standards profit from women's insecurities. Now, you wrote a great article on this, Emma, for She Defined a few years ago, and it's still one of our most popular stories. So that just goes to show that women in particular are looking for advice and information on this because it's something that affects us all. In this article, you explained how women are relentlessly bombarded with marketing for beauty, skin, diet, and hair products that promote unrealistic beauty standards as a way to drive sales. The goal of most of these marketing messages encourages women to spend money to fix problems with their appearance. A study done by financial comparison site Mozo found that Australians spend $22 billion a year on their appearance, which is staggering. And that includes things like professional hair colouring, skincare products. That's kind of what's accounting for those purchases. So on average, to put that into perspective, that's about $450 spent per person per year at the lower end of the scale, and ranges up to about just under $1,000 spent per person per year. So that's a lot of money allocated to improving our image. Do you think we should be spending that much on beauty?
I think it's definitely something we need to be more conscious of, and it's just so normalized as part of being a woman. I think at least once a week, me and my girlfriends will text each other complaining about how expensive it is to be a woman. But what we're really saying is it's expensive to try to keep up with all of these standards. I mean, for me, just from hair appointments, getting my nails done, getting a facial, gym memberships, taking supplements, makeup, skincare, it is quite a lot to keep up with. And I think given the context of the fact that we still don't have like gender equality when it comes to our incomes and earning potential, it is a lot of money that we're spending on keeping up with these expectations. And I almost think that we should include like therapy into that cost because of the mental stress of trying to keep up with all these expectations.
Yeah, 100%. Now, a lot of our beliefs around beauty are deeply entrenched. We've got the patriarchy to thank for that. From the messages we receive as young girls to the pressure to retain our youthfulness as we age. How often we were complimented as kids that we were pretty. And then into adulthood, we have this pressure to maintain our youthful looks, to retain our currency. Now, this is for women specifically. I mean, you always hear men being complimented for aging like a fine wine, but you very rarely hear that same compliment extended to women. And especially now as I'm navigating moving into my late 30s and I'm losing my looks, so to speak, I am feeling quite a bit of pressure to maintain it for as long as I can because I feel like that's something that I can have value through or have currency through, which I know is, an ideal I need to challenge, but I can't deny that that's a thing that exists in society. And a lot of this ideal of attaining a feminine body type is, deeply entrenched in the patriarchy, as I mentioned. Women were often deemed better marriage material if they were young and beautiful, or if they represented an hourglass body figure, which, symbolized fertility. So nowadays we see diet, beauty, and fitness industries making huge profits from this by creating an unattainable physical ideal and then designing the products that promise to bridge the gap between that ideal and reality. Consider how many products promise to improve your image or turn back the clock, everything from vampire facials to filler and Botox, slim shakes and enhancement products like bra inserts to give you a fuller looking bust, the list goes on. Yet many of these products are actually failing to deliver the promised results. Do you think that's problematic?
I do. And I think that it's a game that's rigged against us because if we ever manage to somehow attain all of these beauty standards, they're just going to invent new ones for us to keep up with. I mean, I've heard of people getting armpit surgery and eyelid surgeries and all of it. They're always going to find something. Like next it's going to be my elbows aren't beautiful enough. It's going to be something no matter what. And I think that it's intentional. It sounds a bit conspiratorial, but I just think that it's really a lose-lose situation. I don't think that it's realistic for us to just completely separate ourselves from the patriarchal capitalist ideals of beauty. They are very deeply ingrained, and I don't know if it's fair to expect individuals to just stand alone in the face of all of this conditioning. But I do think it's worth just starting to get gently curious about where this pressure that we feel to keep up comes from and whether it's serving us, and trying to find a balance of feeling good and wanting to be able to participate in those rituals that do feel authentic to us, and those that just perpetuate the idea that we're not good enough in some way. So yeah, I do think that it's quite problematic. We all learnt at one point that it's better to be young looking, to be thin, to be completely unblemished, to not age. Where did we learn that from? We weren't born with these ideas. They were given to us along the way.
Yeah, and I'm actually curious to know why we still uphold attractiveness as a social currency. Like, why don't we just reject all the treatments and the tweakments and just be our natural selves and own it? Where do you think this pressure's still coming from?
I think that it's tricky because some things that I do that are beautifying, I genuinely enjoy. And it's sort of I'm trying to be really self-reflective and do almost a cost-benefit analysis, because all of these rituals do have a cost, not just financial, but sometimes definitely in terms of my schedule. Sometimes they hurt. Sometimes they just are a bit annoying, but some of them are worth it. I love a good blow wave. I love getting my nails done. I love a nice facial and good skincare. Those things are worth the cost to me. They genuinely feel good. But there are other things, like I do not enjoy having eyelash extensions. I've tried it. My eyes are very sensitive. I really don't like people touching my eyeballs. Or getting my hair colored. I can't bear to sit in the salon all day. I admire people who do it. I can't do it. But I think it's, I don't know, it's quite a confusing one, because I'm the last person to sort of sit here and say that wanting to attain a certain aesthetic is wrong. I think that'd be very hypocritical of me. I engage in the beauty industry, and I have a very complicated relationship with my appearance. And as much as I would love to say that I don't care what people think of my looks, it feels good to be validated. And I think that one very easy way that we've been told to get that is through our looks. As you said, our appearance has been a form of currency for such a long time. I just don't think that that's something that we can easily separate ourselves from overnight.
Yeah. And I think definitely things like social media are probably amplifying the impact of quote unquote looking beautiful or coming across as attractive, because then you get the attention that comes through those channels. And I think particularly for women, we get attention from both men and from women. Like if I put on a pretty dress and I snap a photo and share it on my social media, I can tell you right now, like heaps of my girlfriends will be the first to comment and say things like, looking great, or, you know, hot stuff, or beautiful dress. And that actually feels good when you get those compliments. Like I'm not going to deny that either. And so it's really hard to go, I'm dressing up because I want to feel good and confident, and that makes me feel great about myself. And self-esteem is so important. But then on the other hand, questioning whether I'm doing it for the attention and for the validation, and like, why do we need that? Oh, what are your thoughts on that? I'm always so conflicted on that one.
Me too. And I love posting a little selfie for validation. It does feel good. And at the same time, sometimes it feels a little hollow. I mean, there have been times when I've been complimented on my appearance, and it totally depends on where my head is at that day. And sometimes it's actually made me feel sad because I feel deeply unseen. I feel like when I'm only ever complimented on my appearance, I wonder, does this person see that I have a goofy sense of humor, that I'm compassionate, that I'm thoughtful, that I'm anything else than what they see on the surface? Because that type of approval, it feels very good in the moment. But I'm also really aware that I am also aging and that my looks are fleeting, and it is the most natural thing in the world for us to start to age and look different and no longer look like we're in our 20s, because we're not. And I want to know that I'm going to have that love and validation and acceptance long after my looks have changed a lot. I want to feel that there's a really solid sense for my sense of self-worth. And if that's always hinging on my looks, that's not going to be the case. So I think it's about finding a more diverse range of ways that we feel worthy.
Yeah. I'm going to go against the grain here. Maybe this is a controversial point of view, but just bear with me. You can challenge me on this if you want to. But I'm going to say that I think a lot of women, to some degree, still like looking good and still enjoy the potential benefits associated with looking good. So, for example, they may get more attention from their peers, as I've mentioned. If they are dating, they might be more likely to attract someone, or perhaps they've been able to find some level of professional success, especially if they work in a very visually responsive industry. I imagine looking good might pay off if you work in, say, media or marketing or fashion. And I don't say this to scold those women, because I'm always an advocate of, if you've got it, flaunt it, use what you have to your advantage, and definitely try and get ahead where you can. But what do you think on that one? Like, I don't know, feel free to challenge my view on that. Like, are women using their looks or their appearance to get ahead and they kind of like that? Should they not be doing that? I don't know. What do you think?
Gosh, I guess I agree. I find myself stuck at the same crossroads, and I think that there would be a lot of people that might take a firmer stance and no, don't engage in these sort of rituals. Don't try to get validation based on your looks. But it would be very, again, hypocritical of me. And some people might say, well, who cares what anybody thinks? You should dress how you want, look how you want. You don't need approval from other people. You don't need to care what anyone else thinks. Honestly, I do care what people think. It's literally in my DNA to want to be accepted by those around me. And the longest time, the most accessible and obvious way for me to do that was to look the right way. It's the first thing we observe about people before we get to speak to them, before we know their history and how kind their heart is and how intelligent they are, or how funny they are. We are programmed to make snap decisions about their appearance. And I think that it's quite natural to feel conflicted about wanting to free ourselves from these beauty standards, particularly in moments when I feel quite angry sometimes, when I think about all the time and money and energy I put into my looks. What revolutionary acts might I have achieved if I was not always at the gym or at the salon or all of these different things? And it's both and. I don't think it's either or. And then to add an extra layer of confusion for me, I sometimes feel like I'm in no place to speak to this at all sometimes, because I do have an immense amount of physical privilege. I'm white, I live in a slim body, I don't have physical disabilities. So the ability to come close to this ideal beauty standard is something that's accessible to me. And so I may feel conflicted, but I'll never know the very real discrimination that happens for people who live in much larger bodies, women of color, women with disabilities, gender diverse people. And so I think that the game is rigged for everyone, especially when you consider that someone who is so privileged still never feels good enough. I can't imagine what so many other people out there must be feeling and experiencing in terms of actual discrimination.
That's such a good point. That really helps broaden the lens on this whole topic, actually, when you look at it from that perspective and think about how those who are in a more disadvantaged position might be feeling about trying to live up to these very unrealistic beauty ideals. I guess one of the things that I find to be a never-ending battle for women is the idea that we are always striving to improve and enhance ourselves. And I'm sure many of us find it exhausting, like in some form or another. I don't know if you've read Gia Tolentino's book, Trick Mirror. In it, there's a chapter titled Always Be Optimizing, and it kind of speaks for itself. And in that chapter, she writes about the pressures that women are under to present the very best version of themselves, essentially optimizing their personal brand and aspiring to become the ideal woman. And so what does that look like? She shares examples like women always having to have their hair done and maintaining a meticulous skincare routine, doing boutique exercise classes, drinking expensive juices, and so on. And it's all in this pursuit of optimizing oneself. And I mean, I have and currently am guilty of doing a lot of these things. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, do I know of any men who are always optimizing? Not really. So why are women stuck in this loop?
That's a really good question. And if I'm thinking about the men in my life, I mean, some of them like to dress nicely or they might go to the gym, but they're more likely to be focused on like performance goals and what they're able to do with their body. Whereas maybe this is a bit of a hangover from the times when our bodies were currency, and our bodies are now seen as this project to perfect and sculpt and chisel and decorate like a Christmas tree, instead of what it really is, which is it's a meat suit so that we can experience life and eat delicious food and go on roller coasters and travel around the world. And I think that when we're so focused on perfecting our body, it almost becomes a form of self-objectification. And I have felt that many times in my life when I have been at what other people might consider like my most optimal self, and I feel completely disembodied. I feel completely out of touch with myself because I'm objectifying myself. I'm not the subject of my story. I'm just a project to constantly be working on. And it is really exhausting. And I don't know how rewarding it is. It's such a fine balance to strike.
Really is. There are some days where I'm just like, you know what, I just want to look like a slob. That would just be easier. But we don't always have the option to. I mean, sometimes I think paying attention to our appearance is not always about upholding a beauty ideal. It's about just having some kind of level of presentation, for example. Like you wouldn't turn up to a job interview, you know, looking ungroomed, because then that might lower your chances of getting the job. So in that instance, I would say that's not upholding a beauty ideal, but it's more about just trying to look good and present well so you have better chance of getting that job. So it is such a fine balance, isn't it? I want to talk now about how we can fight against these unrealistic beauty standards, because I think a lot of women will be frustrated with being bombarded with all of these messages, but then not knowing what to do about it, or maybe trying to reframe the way that they think about it. So, what about those of us who we see the beauty ideals for what they are, but we want to reject it or at least become more aware of them and the way that they impact our lives? Where can we begin? So I thought we could both share some tips here. One thing I think about a lot is asking myself the question, am I putting effort into improving my image because it makes me feel good, or am I doing it to please others? So for example, do I go to Pilates twice a week and eat a healthy diet because it helps me to stay healthy and feel good in my body? And when I'm healthy, I feel good? Or am I doing it to attain some kind of aesthetic that I think society will deem acceptable? So I think asking questions like this is potentially a healthy way to see whether you're buying into unrealistic ideals or not. Do you do anything like this where you really kind of question why you're doing something and whether it's trying to uphold a beauty standard or just do something good for yourself?
Yeah, that's almost exactly the approach I take as well. And when I'm asking myself those questions, I really try to be genuinely curious about the response, because I think if we're judging ourselves, if the answer is actually, yes, I do want validation, I do want to achieve these beauty ideals, it's going to trigger our internal defensiveness, and we may not be able to actually see where those things are coming from. And I also just think that it's really important to be self-compassionate, because these things have been drilled into our brains from such an early age. I had a very healing conversation with a friend of mine because we were both having a negative body image day, and it's such a universal thing. We're all so hard on ourselves. And whenever a friend of mine shares it with me, I'm like, what are you talking about? But then I'm thinking they probably feel the same way when I share it with them. But what was interesting about this conversation is that we were both layering a lot of like self-judgment and shame on top of the bad body image day. We were like saying things that, oh, we're so silly for feeling this way. It doesn't matter. Why are we like focusing on something so unimportant as our looks? And I stopped her because it's a lot easier sometimes to advocate for people we love than it is for ourselves. And I said, no, this isn't our fault. We've been literally brainwashed by the patriarchy and capitalism for such a long time. They have already taken so much from me. I'm not going to also let them make me feel like this is my fault, that I'm somehow shallow or a bad person for wanting to access a beauty ideal that I have been told will keep me safe. As you said, there are situations like job interviews or the dating world or making friends where we are judged on our appearance. And I think to pretend otherwise is just unrealistic. It's not taking into account the full context that we live in. So yeah, I'm in a similar place with it. I want to give myself more freedom to not conform, but I also want to be kind to myself and understand the reasons why I still try to at times.
Yeah, which is the next point I was going to bring up, is like maybe we need to practice a bit more self-love and have a bit more compassionate self-talk around our own body image so that we're not feeling this sort of pressure on ourselves so much. Most of us are our harshest critics and we have brutal inner dialogue. So noticing these cruel thoughts and being kinder to ourselves in those moments could be one way to ease that pressure to feel like we have to uphold these unrealistic beauty ideals. I mean, do you think that's some valid advice?
Definitely. And I think that positive self-talk looks really different for everyone. I know people who really enjoy the very positive self-affirmations of like, I am beautiful, I am perfect. Those things, to be quite honest, don't work for me, especially when I'm in a negative headspace. I tend to try to do more like body neutrality or quite factual talk. So if I'm in a position where I'm feeling negative about the way I look, it's not going to hit right for me to say, I'm beautiful, I'm this, I'm that, because one, it doesn't feel true in that moment. And two, I think the bigger point is that I want to care less either way. I don't want to combat a day where I don't feel that I look good by saying, yes, you do. I want to say, okay, if I don't, am I less worthy? Am I less of a good person? Am I less of a good friend, a good partner, a good colleague? I want to shift my focus away from my body. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I want to just be factual about it. This body lets me experience my life. It carries me through the world, and I don't have to love how it looks today to be grateful for where it is.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing that I think about a lot is when it comes to exercise. You mentioned like going to the gym a lot. I mentioned my experience with Pilates. And one thing that could challenge this idea is that we rather choose to do movement that we enjoy rather than viewing exercise as a way to punish our bodies. I think you might be able to speak to this point quite well because you wrote that excellent piece on your relationship with exercise and how it's changed over the years. What's your take?
I really wish that I could sit here and say that I'm in a very perfectly healed, balanced relationship with exercise. As much as I have come a long way, I do struggle with it sometimes because it's something that I struggled with for decades, and I don't think that it's fully behind me. I would describe myself as a recovering exercise addict because it gives me the ability to move stagnant energy through my body. And also it helps me to maintain a physique that's societally acceptable. But I suppose one helpful question that I would recommend people ask if they're trying to evaluate their relationship with exercise is, if you knew that your current workout regime would never have an impact on the way you look, it would never change one thing about your body, would you still want to do it? And it's a hard question to ask, especially when we're constantly bombarded with fitness, social media influences that now you need to be a runner. Well, now it's actually all about bodybuilding. Actually, now you need to do Pilates for the long and lean aesthetic. And the body trends are always changing. And I think that's kind of the point because it just keeps us on our toes and keeps us thinking that we're not doing the right thing and we're always jumping onto the next fitness bandwagon. And it's just really interesting to me. I think that, you mentioned earlier that there was once this beauty standard of having a very curvaceous hourglass figure because it indicated fertility. And I think as society has changed, we're now seeing a pretty concerning trend back towards this glamorization of an ultra, ultra slim and lean physique, which to me, I wonder, is that a sign of beauty or is that a sign of obedience? The ability to deprive ourselves of pleasure, of delicious food, and the ability to rest and be soft and gentle with ourselves. And just instead, we're just expected to be constantly, as you said, optimizing, working ourselves ragged in our businesses, taking on all the responsibility in our families, and then also no dessert, no rest days, just go, go, go all the time until we're in these these bodies that are just so exhausted and we're just praised for it. And so now when I'm very stressed, I find that I'm exercising more and I find it very hard to take a rest day, maybe because I don't want to sit with my emotions. And I have shared with people, I'm actually really struggling. I'm over-exercising. I'm very exhausted. And they say, well, you look great at least. And it's
so unhelpful in that moment.
So unhelpful. And I'm like, well, that's all that matters. Thank you. And I say it in a joking way. So I understand their response, but they're like, oh, you're looking good. What's your secret? I'm like, I'm really stressed. I'm really depressed. And I'm joking, kind of. And it's really normalized. It's just really normalized. So I just think it's quite an interesting thing, the exercise one.
Really, really tough, isn't it? Yeah. For me, I can't say I've historically ever used exercise as a way to punish my body per se, but I think definitely in my younger years, I probably exercised a lot more than I do now, more than I needed to probably. But now I view it more as a way to keep strong so that day-to-day tasks and activities are easier, like carrying the groceries up to my apartment, for example, and also just staying mobile and, keep the joints moving and all that sort of thing. Like my sort of health perspective on exercise has really shifted in the last decade, I would say, and I do it more from a perspective of I want to stay fit and healthy and maintain a level of health as I'm aging, and especially maintain muscle as I'm aging, because for women, that starts to drop off as you're getting older. But yeah, you're right. There's probably still so many women out there who are going to the gym or doing some form of exercise, jumping from trend to trend, as you mentioned, all in this pursuit of trying to attain a particular body shape or whatever it is that's being promoted at the moment through the latest celebrity wave or diet trend or whatever. And it's really hard to be fully freed of that when it's in your face all the time. Okay. So talking about striking that balance, even though it's challenging, we've identified that unrealistic beauty standards exist, and we've acknowledged that we have the power to change our views around it, or at least have more awareness of it. But I think realistically, the sweet spot is about finding that balance. So we won't be able to escape it fully, as the products are still going to be made, the advertising's still going to happen, and there are going to be moments where we find ourselves fully immersed in or even indulging in beauty or beautifying ourselves. So, I, for one, love going into a cosmetic store just as much as the next person. I love looking for new skincare and makeup products. I actually find it fun. And but that doesn't necessarily make me a bad feminist, does it? And, I've often loved playing with makeup as a way to learn new techniques or as a way for creative self-expression, not because I'm trying to conform to a specific beauty ideal. So for me, it's again having that counter questioning. So am I doing this to uphold a beauty standard or am I doing it for other reasons? So, I'm not saying that every time I put makeup on, I'm trying to learn a new technique or have some form of creative self-expression, but a lot of the time it is. So it's kind of about striking that balance. Maybe there are moments where you do just want to look pretty, and then there are moments where you're like, I'm learning something new and I like learning. So how do you try and strike the balance with things like that?
I think quite similarly, I see it as it's like a buffet of things that we can do if we want to. And absolutely loving makeup or pretty dresses doesn't make anyone a bad feminist. I guess isn't the whole point that we have the freedom to choose, and having that awareness of when we are making a free choice and when we are being really influenced by our environment is just a really helpful starting point. I really like makeup. I see it as an art form. And sometimes I do what they call, I think it's called like pre-shower makeup. Like I don't know how to do a certain type of makeup. I'm really bad at eyeshadow. So I'll do it before I get in the shower just to play. It's playtime. It's like doodling on a sketch pad, except I'm doing it on my face. And we know that people use makeup for all sorts of reasons, not to just look younger or more fertile or more pretty. I really love watching like Instagram reels of people who do really, really strange makeup. And there's lots of very creative people using these types of products now. So I think that I'm in a similar boat. I pick and choose what I genuinely enjoy and I leave what doesn't. And I think that's the whole point. We're free to choose. It's a form of self-expression. Don't let them take that away from us too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think there are days where I do just want to dress up and look good just for myself, not because I'm trying to impress anyone else or uphold a particular beauty standard. Like, I simply just want to feel feminine and look good and just be kind of proud about that. So yeah, I agree with you there. Like, strike the balance, but like don't have it completely diminished either. I'm wondering if we can share some tips around what we can say or do for our friends or people that we know who maybe kind of feel like it's all about getting the compliments. You know, I think we've talked about maybe we can share compliments that aren't necessarily about appearance as a way to kind of deflect from, oh, you're so pretty, or that's beautiful, or maybe we can share some ideas around how we can share compliments for women that have nothing to do with their appearance. What are some things you might say to your friends, even if you think they look beautiful, but you don't want to make your first comment or reaction be about their beauty?
I think my friends are just incredible in their energy that they bring into the room. I do notice what they might be wearing or how they've done their hair because they just happen to be, you know, very stylish, cool people. But it's not because they look, you know, traditionally beautiful. Sometimes I might say, like, I love how well you know your own like style and what you feel good in, or like the room really lights up when you walk into it. You just have this like incredible infectious energy, or you are so curious about other people's lived experience and you make me feel really comfortable to share where I really am today. And those sorts of compliments I just think just really hit home so much more. And also you're hilarious. You're so interesting. You have such wise perspective on things. These compliments feel amazing. I think that we just need to say these things to each other much more often.
Yeah. I mean, I try and challenge myself on this because, of course, I want to tell my friends that they look beautiful if I think that, but I'll often say things like, you look so happy, if I genuinely believe that they do, because I think that's such a nice thing to see in someone else and to acknowledge it when you see it. Another compliment that I'm often given from my friends, which always makes me like want to tear up a bit, is if I've shared something that I've done or achieved, then they just say, I'm so proud of you. And I just feel like that's like the nicest way to compliment someone about something they've done without making it about how they look, even if it has got something to do with that. So one of my really close friends, she does a lot of modelling work because she kind of works in the modelling and acting space, and she looks great in all of the jobs that she shoots. And, you know, I want to tell her that every time, but I kind of feel like I'm becoming a broken record. And I'm also like, I know she's so much more than her beauty. She's a smart girl and she does all these wonderful things. And so I often will say to her, like, you're in your element. This job looks like it was so much fun and you look like you're having a great time, and like, well done for landing another gig, and, you know, things like that. That's still really encouraging and uplifting and complimentary, but I'm not using her looks as the first go-to point to be like, this is the compliment I'm paying you now. So yeah, it can be challenging though, because I think it's just like an automatic reflex for a lot of us.
Absolutely. You're really making me reflect because, you know, as you know, many of my friends I've met through a dancing space, and it's a pretty aesthetic focused hobby. You know, we all take these videos at the end of class, and I'm now noticing, as you said, that I should be diversifying the types of compliments I give them, because you look so amazing. It comes out of my mouth every day and I mean it every single time, but they are so much more to me than that. And I would never want them to think that that is anything to do with why I love them. It's true. They're gorgeous, but that's the least impressive thing about them.
Yeah, and you could say a heap of other things like, you're such a great friend, or you're a good listener, or I value the time that you made for me today because my time with you is more important than anything. And yeah, I think it's like just thinking beyond what you see in front of you and complimenting the things in the person that you really cherish about them beyond their looks. But absolutely, it can be so challenging. Did you have any other thoughts about this topic in general and just challenging beauty ideals?
Yeah, I think one thing I really want to suggest people try is that if they are having a day where they're feeling like a little bit hyper-focused on their looks, or maybe they're being quite harsh on themselves with their appearance, sometimes there's something underneath that. I think that because for so long we've been told that our worth, our validity, our ability to be loved and seen and accepted is synonymous almost with our appearance. Sometimes when I think to myself, I don't like how I look today, or I'm not comfortable in my body, or my hair isn't doing what I want it to do, if I just dig underneath that a little bit, I'm actually feeling a little bit isolated or disconnected or overwhelmed, and I'm not fully engaged in my life in a way that makes me feel loved and valued. And I think that because of the way we've been conditioned, if we're feeling deeper things that are causing insecurity or self-doubt, our bodies can become a very easy scapegoat to put those feelings. It's almost like a simpler problem, if you like, to fix, because it's right there. It's very surface level. And sometimes I think that I've defaulted to hyperfixating on my appearance because I don't really want to go into old attachment wounds or deeper self-esteem issues. So sometimes it's maybe not about the looks. And if you're able to connect with a friend who makes you feel very safe, or lose yourself in a hobby that makes you lose track of time and feel like you're in that flow state, that sometimes has been more healing than to keep thinking about my body. I almost want to just forget I have a body sometimes. It's relaxing.
It certainly makes all those other thoughts and issues just melt away, doesn't it? Look, I don't really have anything else to say on this other than just be conscious of it. If it is something that bothers you, if you feel like you're constantly having to optimize, as we've mentioned, and self-improve, and it's getting you down, maybe just take a step back from it for a minute and just really question why you're doing it. Are you doing it for yourself, or are you doing it to uphold this societal expectation? If you're feeling the peer pressure from your friends to maybe dress up or look a certain way, can you take some time out from that to just sit with it for a minute and ask yourself how you really feel about that? I think it's always good to just have space sometimes from things that feel heavy and feel like a lot of pressure, and just take a minute and go, what do I actually want for myself in this situation? And am I buying into these ideals that I actually don't align with? And go from there. So I don't know if you have any closing thoughts on that.
I think your advice is great. And as always, just be kind to yourself. This is not your fault that you feel this way. And you are so worthy for things that are so much more important than the way you look. And I bet that you have a friend or a loved one that if you tell them, what's your favorite thing about me that you can't see, they'll have a list of things that they want to share with you. And that can be really beautiful to hear sometimes when we need it.
Yeah, such a good point. Thanks so much for contributing to this conversation, Emma. Been a pleasure as always.
Thank you. I've loved this conversation.
Thanks so much for joining our discussion. If you've enjoyed it, be sure to hit that subscribe button or leave a comment or review. I've been your host, Sharon Green, and if you'd like to find out more about She Defined, you can visit us at shedefined.com.au.